Hello, my name is Justin Bright, and welcome to Kerbal Space Program version 1.8.1 in my next small step RP-1 career mode playthrough. And we are right smack dab in the middle of a big design and build-isode, basically, where I have been going over my plans for a mission to Venus that combines three things: an orbiter, a lander, and an atmospheric probe, all into one combination mission to save on the cost and complication of trying to do that 3 times over the course of 3 launch windows or whatever. So we are packing them all into one and trying to build that out. So I cut off in the middle of the testing because we have plenty more to work on even after everything that we've done in the previous episode. So let's get to it, shall we? All right, so we have a simulation here of our Telefor Heavy and our Pioneer Venus spacecraft. So let's do this as if we were going to be launching this into the correct orbit and all of that. So we are going to start by targeting the moon and then launching into the plane of the target and engaging the autopilot. And I do time warp through these fairly frequently, so it's fine for the most part. Like, this will get us numbers that are good enough, I think. Sometimes the numbers are slightly off because it behaves a little bit worse because it's not able to respond quite fast enough to inputs and so forth if you do it this way rather than running it at 1x speed. But for the most part, it should work just fine. So you'll see that one of the things that I've changed here is I have the booster rate, pitch rate set up to 0.3 or set down to 0.3, which is very, very necessary because this tank is swathed in MLI layers, which are a insulation for the liquid hydrogen fuel that keeps it nice and chilly and keeps it from boiling off, which is a huge problem. And if one of the tendencies of that MLI is it likes to catch fire if you give it too spicy of an ascent. Generally, you're supposed to have a tank that is covered in MLI should probably be inside of a fairing, but with these big chunky centaurs that are 3 meters in diameter, like, I just don't understand how you're supposed to do that. So you have to loft your rocket into a less efficient profile, or remove the MLI layers entirely and accept the boil off that you're going to get. So trade-offs one way or the other. Okay, so now that burn is just about finished up, it was just using RCS to fix that. I've put together a little flight performance window that can go along with your flight recorder for MacLeod PVG to show you how well your rocket performs. So you can see the Q is the aerodynamic pressure, and you can see that steadily ascends to max Q, and then it drops off precipitously. And so this is the point at which we need to really worry about the atmosphere, and then down this curve is when we need to worry about it less. And you can see what we've done here. AOA is angle of attack. That is the angle off of prograde that we were pointing at any given point during our flight. And this is pitch. The green one is pitch, and we can see that we smoothly pitch down until we got here at the end of our angle at the end of our of when atmosphere was an issue. And so this marks the transition of MacLeod PVG from atmospheric guidance, which was following that 0.3 degree per second booster pitch over, to vacuum guidance, where it will then just assume, like, okay, now we don't have to worry about atmosphere. We're going to ignore all of this, and we are going to just do what we got to do to get into orbit. So this massive right angle turn that it did here, and this massive spike in angle of attack, means that we, like you saw it happen, we flipped over like a bunch of degrees. Like, we flipped halfway down to point almost horizontally when we had been pointing mostly up before that. And that comes with this massive increase in angle of attack, a bunch of drag losses, or steering losses in particular. So gravity losses you reduce by going sideways a lot faster. Drag, you be more pointy. Steering, you want to have a smoother pitch over, smoother pointing. So we actually expended about 9,061 meters per second of delta V getting from there to here, which is a little bit better than what we had planned for. So that's good, but it could be a lot better. I've seen rockets do dramatically better than this if you were able to very finely tune this. And if you go to the RP-1 wiki and look for the MacJeb PVG Bible, that is what will give you all of the details that you need on this. This was a very surface level explanation. So this is something that you can use to kind of see how you're doing as far as your launch performance. So we have gotten into orbit and we have 3,518 meters per second of delta V. I'm not sure that this particular launcher can do much better unless I remove the MLI layers, and then I can have a spicier exit from the atmosphere that does not worry about setting my tank on fire, because this will absolutely explode if I did anything lower than 0.3. So that's what we have to work with, 3,500 meters per second of delta V. Now then, let's actually take a look at Venus. Click on Venus, set as target. I don't have control. Okay, now I have control so I can actually make maneuvers and stuff. So we can close our Ascent guidance. We're going to open up our maneuver planner and maneuver node editor because we're probably going to need to play with both. And I want to do a advanced transfer to the target. Workshop selection. So we can see our transfer windows, and we can actually see this one and the next one because they come fairly often. So we have this transfer, which is in about 100 days. Yeah, this is where I think I had planned before. Like it was around here, like 95 days. So we're somewhere in here. But you can see that there's a couple different parts that are actually useful. So let's just grab select all of that and zoom in on that. So that's what we're looking at as far as how to get there. And you can already see the problem. The delta V, the lowest delta V inside this window, the lowest delta V anywhere on this is 3,625. So even at the absolute cheapest, we don't have enough delta V. We're short by over 100 meters per second, and there's nothing we can really do about that to make that any better. Not this window, not the next window, which looks like it is a little bit better. It has a little bit more. It looks like that is when it's pointing us to. So that's it. Like this mission has already failed. I just didn't pack enough delta V. And that's probably due to two factors. First, I could have made my launcher a little bit bigger. I could have flown a more efficient ascent profile, or I could have lightened up our payload, which is what I would love to do. But let's see what this, even if I do get this, let's just assume that I make this on the next pass. So we'll just grab this. Lowest delta V is in 233 days, actually, not in 196 days, which is actually great. I might do that anyways. So let's just create that node. Okay, so 3,700 meters per second. Let's assume that I get a launcher up and ready that actually does have that. And this is a funky, weird. Oh, it's because it's so far in the future. We're actually coming from here and coming around in a nice low energy ellipse into Venus. So I actually love this encounter. Let's take a look at that. So that puts us with a parasite of 100 kilometers, which is not gonna do it. Let's go ahead and see if we can't fix that. As you can see, it's very finicky. The tiniest touch is making it fly off in wildly large directions, and I'm not even like, when I go back and forth, I'm not even getting the same point again. Okay, so 171 kilometers, fabulous. Let's just look at that. This is just an academic exercise at this point. So now that we have this maneuver, let's see what it would take to add a maneuver. And what do we have? We have 3,569 meters per second. Okay, 3,569, negative, update. Okay, so that does get us into orbit. Not a fantastic orbit, but it does get us into a scientific orbit that will satisfy that contract. Great. So that would work with all of this. However, we would need more, because we don't have enough fuel to actually get there, we're going to have to do something else. And I'm not sure exactly what that would be. So the upper stage is enough, but let's take a look at what it would, like what I could get away with, right? So it's, what was it, like 30,000 kilometers, something like that. So we're at 10,000 kilometers. So I could go as low as 2,900 meters per second of delta V. So if I were to plan for 3,000 meters per second on this thing and remove that extra fuel that I have on there, I could reduce the weight of the upper stage. And then that might, in theory, give us enough delta V to get actually out there. Alternatively, I could light up this stage right now. Like I could burn out the Centaur upper stage right now in orbit to get us most of the way, and then I could light up one ignition on this engine to get us pushed into a trajectory on the way towards Venus. So that would use one of my 2 ignitions on this thing, but it would get us on our way and be enough delta V. And then we have also shown that once I'm there, I could use less of this delta V to get into a slightly worse orbit, a slightly higher, more elliptical orbit, and that might be okay. However, that would also mean that we are worrying about, we are putting more stress, once, like I said, on our lander and making sure that that will actually succeed, because that might burn up at that with that extra velocity. I don't know. I really have no idea because I've never tried it. That gives us some options, right? So we have some options, we have some thoughts. There's a couple constraints that we have now that we need to think about, is whether this will this works in a couple different ways, because it feels like we are now constrained on ignitions. So we could, in theory, switch out this engine entirely and try to find one that has more ignitions. And that might be one way to get around this issue, because then we could have something that would work, that would allow us to burn more frequently, to change our orbit, to change our trajectory, to actually get this done without relying on just the big ISP that the Centaur has. Because that's the reason why we want to use this as much as possible, because it has massive specific impulse compared to anything else we can put together. So that's another way to think about that. Like, that's a way to get around this issue, is if I picked a different engine, it might have more ignitions and might be able to do what we're trying to do a little bit better than the Agena is able to. I like the Agena because I was able to get 3,500 meters per second of delta V for about 2 tons. Like, not hardly even 2 tons. And that's pretty fantastic if you ask me. I would love to be able to get more than that, but there's a couple different options. Like, I could try a hypergolic generic thruster build that has that uses the Aerozine and NTO. That might be something that works. Like, if I did that, then I wouldn't need to have 2 of these stages. Like, I could actually have a single stage with just Aerozine and NTO, probably replace this with bigger thrusters, ditch this engine entirely, put on a couple of the generic thrusters on the bottom there, and maybe that would work. Maybe that would be something that would work, but I'm not sure if that's more efficient than using a tank that does not require high pressure, because high pressure tanks, they rob you of some of your delta V because they have a worse mass fraction of fuel compared to non-high pressure tanks, just by their very nature. So yeah, that's something that we could think about. Like, that would allow us to get around the restart issue, but it would be a less efficient engine, right? We could use an RL-10, but that would require us to have better technology than we have here in the 1962, 1963 era, because it is going to have boil off. Even right now, you can see that we are losing 0.02 kilograms per hour, and if you give that the better part of a year, your tank's going to be empty. Like, even at this, like, this is not as shielded as it could be, but it's pretty well shielded, and it would be in fact completely empty, and that would be a big shame. So that's another consideration. Like, the best upper stages that I have right now are cryogenic, and that has a whole bunch of problems of its own. So yeah, there's other engines that fit this criteria, like the Vega engine, but the Vega is heavier, and I don't want heavy. Like, I want light. I want really, really light. I want a light, tiny upper stage that is able to do, like, put this 600 kilogram probe into orbit around Venus for not a tremendous amount of weight. So yeah, that's kind of a lot of the thinking that I have right now. So I'll probably go, now that I've seen that this won't exactly work, like I could make it work and kind of hack it together and it might be good, but it's very much like counting on being able to do things with one ignition and no ability to adjust the orbit once you're there and the whole thing. Like it's all very dicey. So that's something that I'll probably like play with and tinker with, and maybe I'll even show you guys on the video and like fast forward through it and give some commentary or something. But I just wanted to give you guys a little insight into how I plan these missions and how I think about them, because it generally has the same contours, right? Like it starts with, okay, what are the contracts? Oh, that contract's interesting. I wonder what real life mission those seem to be based on. Oh, here's some real life missions that those seem to be based on. What were the parameters and technology level of those missions? Oh, okay, they were far in the future. Well, shoot, how can I build something now that approximates them in some way? And then iterating and testing and designing and testing and designing and testing and spending 10 minutes on every, load and all that. So I've just burned out this Centaur upper stage on purpose because I wanted to test how this thing works outside of... I wanted to test how this thing actually works when I'm underway. Like I want to make sure all of the mission components are actually correct and all that. So we've flown up and gotten a little bit out of the... up to about above... geostationary altitude above Earth. So we are going to decouple and not have the avionics to control anything, of course. Activate this avionics. Shoot, and I guess we have to activate both avionics. Yep, because I accidentally made this a little too big, I guess. I didn't... Yeah, this stage does not actually have enough to control the whole thing by itself. Yeah, I have to combine them, which does increase the power draw, which is interesting. Let's push a little bit away, and we are going to flip down towards the sun. Not forward, probably. Down. And extend our solar panels. Solar panels. 100% exposure. Fantastic. And we'll extend the big antenna because we're going to need it eventually. Okay, so this is what the interplanetary transit would look like. So I would off and turn on SAS and turn on persistent rotation and that whole thing. And then it would be heading out towards Venus over the course of, I don't know, what was it, like 140 days, something like that. Oh no, but, well, hold on. I turn off the avionics, shut down. What's my power situation? Oh, this does not have enough power. Oh, you know what? Because this is tuned for Venus. So this is why I do this. This is why I test the whole procedure out before I even get this on video. And when I say when I'm talking about that during my missions, like, oh yeah, and when I tested this, I had XY problem. This is usually what I mean, where I just kind of do like a dry run, like not the full whatever, not the full actual mission all the way to completion, but I'll do a mock-up of it to make sure that all the pieces actually work. But then I like to have the actual discovery of whether or not I'm a failure with you guys. And yeah, so this is one of those things that we've discovered, that even with the avionics shut down, the communications rigs and everything else on this, with having two sets of avionics and 1, 2, 3 antennas on here, is enough to kill the battery on this. When it gets to Venus, it'll be just fine, but not until then. And we have, yeah, look at that. It's not even down. This doesn't even get us down to the orbit of Venus, like not even really close, which is interesting. Of course, it's because I just pushed off at a completely arbitrary time, so that's not actually a good... This is not a good indicator of literally anything. I just pointed prograde and fired the engine. So anyways, we can look I could just create a, oh, this is my trajectory. We are actually going up, but it should work about the same. No, that's not true at all. Okay, so this is not actually a good indicator of anything, but you can imagine that it would take about 140 days to transit, and it would take about that long for the power to increase enough. And I don't like the idea of the batteries completely dying on this spacecraft before it gets to its destination. That doesn't sound great at all. So that is something that I would have to adjust. So probably the answer to that is increasing the size of the solar panels. Next up, I don't have RCS control. So I flip the avionics back on. We have controls unlocked, and I'm just going to point retrograde and fire up this engine. And once again, this is just dry run of this is how this thing would work if I were to use it. So we can imagine now that we are entering in around the orbit of Venus. So we have now circularized our orbit, or finished our orbit around Venus. We have spent this bottom stage, so we can kick that off. So that comes off. And now what we have is this, turn this avionics off at least. So now we just have this lower stage, or this upper probe, like just the probe bit. And just trying to move it around and see what that's like. Flies very strangely because, it looks like, yeah, because this is mostly in the center of the probe. It looks like it's having a little bit of a hard time being all that reactive, which is interesting. But it looks like it's able to do what it needs to do, but it is spending some fuel to do so. You can see our delta V reducing as I'm fussing around. But anyways, so we would want to do something like point retrograde, and then fire up these engines with their gorgeous little plumes to dip down into the orbit, into a... Oh, this is really... Oh, you know what? Oh, so that's the issue here, is I think I forgot to put an offset, because that's actually why I'm using this. I normally like to use the actual procedural probes, but I'm using this avionics because I had intended to make this... to offset the center of mass of this probe, to offset the fact that I have a giant radar dish stuck to the side of the spacecraft, unbalancing it wildly. So that's something that I would also have to fix. So that's why it's, not balanced in any way. But in any case, what we would do is we would fire the thrusters, get down to 110 or 105 or whatever kilometer parasite, and then we would be able to kick off this probe. So I'm then just going to kick off this probe. And then this, oops, not this, but this, I'm going to want to get into, a good orientation. Sun is down and all that. And then I leave that here. So this then would stay in its orbit. And then I am now worried about this one. So we have now, looks like I've accidentally given myself a very spicy re-entry trajectory around Earth. So let's just see what happens. Okay, we are coming in just about perpendicular to the Earth's surface, so I absolutely expect this to melt and or smash into the ground, but I'm still curious about the parameters with which it does that. This is not a useful test to see if this would survive a Venusian re-entry. However, this might be enlightening nonetheless. So let's just let this drop down. Surface velocity minus. And it just instantly melted because it was upside down. because I was too slow. So that is that. So that is kind of what one of my test missions looks like pretty frequently, is I'm just trying to figure out what are all the things that I haven't thought of? What are the things that I've busted in this design that doesn't work? And what things do work? What works really well? So it actually worked fairly well getting this up into orbit. It didn't actually cost as much delta V as I had planned for, so that would be pretty nice. But there's a lot of things wrong with this probe that I could, this vessel here that I could fix. There's other engines that I could try. There's other configurations. There's actually a really bonkers idea that I thought of in watching other videos. Is I have very recently opened up docking technology, so I could like dock and send this off. It would cost me 85,000 funds to unlock this, but what if I made I don't know, like a smaller one of these? Like this is going to be a 253 ton craft. What if I put something together like this? This is my Tela Cecil rocket, which I'm not sure that I've actually launched, but this is basically just a single RL-10 Centaur on top of my regular old version of the Tela, like not the 3-meter version, but the 2.2 all the way. This should get into orbit with no payload whatsoever. This should get into orbit with plenty of fuel left. And then what if I docked and transferred that fuel over, right? Like then I could launch this on the 150 ton pad, launch the main mission on the 350 ton pad, so I could have both of them launch simultaneously or within a day or two of each other. They meet up. This one fuels up the main craft, and then I have no problem with the extra weight. Then I'm able to head off towards Venus at whatever trajectory I need, and then the boil off and everything else is handled by just refueling it. So that's an interesting idea. That's one thing that I could do. I could make the payload a little bit lighter. I could make the payload a little bit better with more ignition, a bit heavier, but have more ignition so that I could use it to finish the transfer burn to Venus and break into the Venus orbit. So that might be something that I could do. Like, so there's options, right? There's lots of options. There's lots of different ways to go at it. There's, especially with these complicated missions, there's a million different ways to figure out how you want to make these missions happen. So that ended up being a much longer thing than I thought. I might play with this a little bit more and like leave the recording on so that I can maybe fast forward through some of this stuff and show you kind of what I end up landing on, or maybe I'll just skip right ahead to the actual what I actually do for the actual mission. I'm not 100% sure, but that's if you enjoyed this, let me know. I can do a lot more of this, talking through of my design process and all that. If not, then well, you'll see something a little more action focused and permanent in the next one. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. All right, so as you can see, I've decided that we are going to just go right ahead and fast forward through the adjustments that I start making to this craft. I wanted to show like the full design process because something interesting does indeed come out of it in a little bit. So the first decision that I made was to try out an Aerozine and NTO generic thruster, and that wound up being like pretty good, but with the 2.2 kilonewton thruster it wound up being a 1400 second burn time, so that's not great. But if I pair it up, then all of a sudden that time gets down to about 700 seconds, and that starts looking pretty darn good. And I noticed also that if I removed the other tank and the other thrusters, that it got our delta V up to about the same amount as if I had combined them, right? So I was getting something like 3,500 meters per second with the Agena, and then I was getting another 400 or 500 seconds with the generic thruster upper stage. So if I just combine them, that works out a lot better. And you can see now that I'm going through all of the other steps that need to happen with that, like changing where the RCS is, adjusting the avionics, and so forth. And that winds up being about 300 kilograms lighter for the same performance. And so that's the kind of thing, like that's why you want to play with this stuff and see what you think and do what you can to try different things. So just kind of futzing around now with the avionics and the electric charge, to see how long this thing would last, because I wanted to make sure that this will survive. As you recall, we had issues with it surviving inside of Earth's orbit on its way over, so we need to make sure that the solar panels are going to be able to keep this thing alive between now and then. All right, so with that done, now it's time to start taking a look and seeing what that 300 kilogram or so difference might make. I also decided that I didn't like the the payload fairing base that I'd been using on literally every craft so far. So we're just making some adjustments there to try to see what different things look like and how they might work. And of course, as always, you gotta check your staging. That's like something that I end up fighting with a lot on here, is making sure that the staging is right and that fairings are hidden as appropriate, the interstage fairings and so forth. So things to deal with there. So at this point, I was off and I was doing the math and just kind of taking a look. So we have 17,287 meters per second of delta V total. And so that gives us about 4,000 meters per second to get out to Venus. But I'm fairly certain that's not actually enough. So I'm looking through at the tooling and the cost of this rocket and what we're going to need to do to move forward. And somewhere around here, while I'm kind of staring at this rocket and just looking at the numbers and working with the calculator, I kind of came to a decision that I'm just not sure that this Tele4 Heavy is going to be what we need to launch this craft. Like, I just am not sure that it's going to work out. So let's try something a little bit different. The Tele4 Heavy with this probe is about 252-ish tons, so we're not using everything that we need to use on the, or that we can use on the 350-ton pad. So let's try out something that looks a little bit more like the, well, it's somewhere in between a later like Saturn C3 and the Saturn 1, something like that. So it's a weird little hybrid rocket that kind of defies classification. But in general, what I'm doing here is we have up on top the Centaur stage that we know and love, but then I put another upper stage below that, or as a second stage, that has a 4 RL10s in a cluster. And then below that, I have 4 H1s. And now I'm just kind of playing with that and seeing how that works. And I found that that the numbers weren't quite adding up. So what I've done here is I've added 6 H1s at the bottom there. 2 of them have gimbals, 4 of them do not, because we don't actually need them. So I just have 2 on the edges that are going to go ahead and have be those gimbal versions. So now it's time to actually play with the fashion a little bit, because I've kind of come to a decision that the numbers are looking pretty darn good on this. Once I have everything on here, once again, now I'm putting on the all the interstage gubbins that you need, and seeing what we actually are going to need to kick off these much heavier stages, because we are getting very close now. I'm noticing that I've got the staging set up weird at this point in the video, where I can't actually see how much performance we have, but it's something like it's upwards of 18,000 meters per second of delta V, which is well enough to do everything that we want to do. So I'm just switching over into the new tanks so that I can have nice like mount plates and things like that, so that it will all fit nice and look kind of nice. So that's a big part of this design, is I start out with the boilerplate of the just the plain procedural tanks, and then we switch over into these modular tanks so that we can have them look a little bit better. I miss having the textures for the paint job and all that, but you know, I like all the other features that this gives us. So yeah, we're upwards of 18,000 meters per second of delta V, and I was just trying to decide at this point whether I wanted to go with a balloon tank or an integral tank for the first stage. And I think I went integral tank on here because, man, balloon tanks at that size are expensive. So that's something to consider when you are making these really large rockets, is the cost difference between separate structure, balloon, and integral really start to add up. And so, yeah, we're looking at this, and I have 18,780 meters per second of delta V, and it looks kind of great, and it's kind of Saturn-ish almost, like one of those early Saturn rockets, which is pretty darn exciting. So now I start doing the fashion thing of getting these tucked away into the SLS engine mount that I really quite enjoyed, and then working on all the fairing stuff. So yeah, this was basically born out of a desire to use up the 350-ton pad as best as I possibly could, because I have the extra weight. I might as well use it, and it's not going to be so much more expensive that it's like a big prohibitive difference. Like, there's going to be a huge tooling cost that is associated with getting this rocket put together, but it's we need that heavy lift capability, and this works really quite well. Well, maybe it'll work well. We'll get to the testing in a moment. All right, so this is actually my third attempt at launching in a test. I am just defaulting out all of the information on PVG as much as I can for what I assume this rocket will take, and we are launching into the plane of the moon to try to execute this mission. It's actually the third time that I've attempted to launch this, because the first time I forgot avionics entirely. The second time I had some kind of weird electric charge producer bug that had Kerbalism not allowing me to time warp because of the launch clamps I was using, so I just changed what launch clamps I had. But now we are finally there. We are on our way up, and you can see that I have opened my custom window flight performance that is showing me how well this thing is doing. And so far, it looks like it's going pretty darn well. We have 6 H1 engines on the bottom stage, which with only 2 that provide gimbal, but because they're like kind of outboard, they fly. Works pretty darn well. Then we have this big chunky 4 RL-10 second stage that throws us a bunch of the way downrange towards our final orbit, and that means that I don't have to worry too much about using up the Centaur upper stage that we are going to be using to actually deliver our probe, and that comes off just fine. And then we have our final, whoops, there we go, and then I I think I accidentally staged that one off. But now we're back and attempting basically the same launch profile once again, and 3, 2, 1, there we go. So yeah, that comes up pretty nicely, and in between I'll just tweak. In between these launches, I'm just going in and tweaking 1 or 2 things to make sure that I'm fixing any issues that may have come up. And this thing rotates a little bit when it separates, so that's another thing that I might have to look into in the future. But we get pretty good performance out of this RL-10 upper stage, which was indeed pretty similar to the Saturn. To several Saturn designs. Basically, I'll go through a little bit of that probably later, probably not as part of this little build and design and test thing, but this and I'm seeing an issue now where it's just taking forever to burn that upper stage, so I'm gonna get bored and end up fast forwarding a little bit, which is generally not good for your performance. But yeah, so we use that, and that actually allows us to get into orbit with 5,100 meters per second of delta V, and when you when you press the button wrong, you end up flipping around and doing weird stuff. So yeah, things like that will happen. But yeah, my custom flight performance window tells me that I used exactly 9,200 meters per second of delta V, like 9202 or something like that. And then if we go at the absolute optimal window, which I finally remembered was supposed to include the capture burn. That's what the 87-day mark was all about, that is the one with the lowest delta V and a capture burn. It requires us to have 4,500 meters per second of delta V, and I have no idea what's happening here. So I think I'm just trying to burn along the prograde just to test out the whole thing like I've done before. And you see that it was actually stuck. I had the engine bells on the upper stage, the probe stage, stuck inside that hollow ring, and that counted as clipping through. So the next step, obviously, is to go in and adjust that off so it's just kind of hovering a little bit above, but at least then it won't have any more issues with flipping out like that and losing control. And because I'm paranoid at this point, I'm going through and I'm checking all of the other items that I need to, which, like in this case, I was making sure that the Delta V is correct, the avionics are correct, the batteries are correct, the staging is correct, all of that stuff that's necessary to make sure that this will actually be a good rocket in the end. So yeah, with that, that's pretty close to finished. I think we just need to do one last end-to-end test. And there we go, up once again. It launches smoothly, it rotates smoothly, holds its position really quite nicely, and kicks off that first stage pretty rapidly. Fairing comes off with no issues whatsoever, and then we have a nice long burn of that second stage, which is just incredibly efficient because RL-10s are amazing engines. With I think like 430 something, like I'm not sure what the ISP on this one is off the top of my head, but it's pretty darn high, especially compared to all of the chemical thrusters that we've been using previously. So that comes off, and then we get to the point where we are just about circularizing our orbit, which we are doing in just in a regular standard orbit, because what I want to do is I just want to test all of the components one last time. So see, we have a really good separation this time of the probe, of the spacecraft, and then we are able to separate the orbiter and get back into a good orbit, which is fantastic. This time I'm doing a much better job of making sure I'm at least roughly in the right position before I time warp, because we are not getting otherwise a very good test. And here I'm playing with the real antenna to try to see if I can actually get communication to the probe, to the orbiter, and it looks like I have a good solid connection. It doesn't actually help if the orbiter doesn't have connection, of course, but otherwise we are doing just fine. So this is actually a very easy and gentle re-entry for this particular capsule. I'm turning off the smartass whenever I'm when I'm time warping really quickly, to make sure that that's something that is not going to throw us way off course. But when we get down to it, I'm turning on surface velocity minus and just pointing directly into the airstream. And I've checked a couple times while I've been babbling about other things that we have good connection to the orbiter. So this entire time we have good connection, everything seems to be pretty solid, and we are re-entering just fine, and we have slowed down. So yeah, there's a little bit of a yaw that was happening there, and I'm not sure what that's about, but I'm also not sure that I'm terribly stressed about it. And then look at that parachute. One last thing to fix, but I don't think we need to watch that. So there you have it. That is the birth of a new booster, a new launch vehicle, over the course of about 45 minutes or so, but compressed down to about 15 for your watching enjoyment. Hopefully that was fun, interesting, entertaining, whatever. If you liked that, please let me know. If you did not like that, then also please let me know. I do like to make sure that I'm doing what you guys want to, producing what you guys want to see. Like, I want you guys to get as much enjoyment out of this as I do. So please let me know what you liked about that, what you didn't, in the comments below. And yeah, maybe I'll do more of these if you guys really enjoyed that. If you guys found that useful, I'm happy to do a lot more of that, not tutorial style, but just kind of walking through my design processes, and like the compressed time warp thing, as well as the longer form stuff before. Just, yeah, let me know. I'm really happy to do this stuff. It's a lot slower, a little bit less progression, but a little bit more focused on the actual design elements. So if that's helpful, please let me know. And yeah, we'll move right on to more launches now. All right, so we've done a lot of work on design and discussion about how I put together this new rocket, which I think I'm going to call the Paladin 1. But it is going to be an expensive beast. So take a look at this. We'll look at the tooling, which, by the way, the new version of RP-1 has this press to preview fully tooled time and cost, which is amazing. So you can actually hold down this button and it'll show you how long it would take in Kerbal construction time over here. If you just watch this number, I hold that down, goes down to 101 days, that's how long it's going to take. And as it turns out, that's kind of a fateful number, because the window that I'm trying to hit with this is in 96 days. And, you know, anybody who can do very basic math will be able to tell you that 101 days is longer than 96. So we're going to have to do some rush building, and then also even more rush building, because we're going to have to worry about rollout times as well, because this thing is big and expensive. But perhaps worse than that is the fact that when I go to tool all, it's 285,000 funds. Oh my gosh. But I mean, that's just what it is. Like, I mean, scrolling through this list, it's just, I have huge tankage. These 5-meter tanks are so expensive, but also making them any smaller than that, I don't think was going to be much of an option at all. And there's lots of new avionics and all sorts of things in here. So very expensive, but you know, because this is kind of sort of approximating the Saturn, like the early Saturn rockets, I think that it's something that I'm going to be using for most of my heavy lift capacity for a while. So I might as well, right? So yeah, we're going to go with that. This fits comfortably on a 350-ton pad. We've got some additional room for payload if I end up wanting to throw different things up on top here. So yeah, this is a chonker, but hopefully this will work really well and serve us well going forward. Unfortunately, getting that put on our list and tooled and everything else leaves us with two problems. So first of all, this is 125 days worth of work, not including rollout times, which is going to put us well over the 97 days that we have, because we have 96 and some odd hours days left until our Venus transfer window, and the Scanner 1 contract that is intended to satisfy is also going to be expired around that time. So I somehow need to get both of these done in that amount of time, which is going to require some rush building, which is pretty unfortunate, but it's something that I think is going to be just fine. So what I think we're going to do is I'm going to take a look at some of these Venus contracts and see what we can do as far as the advances, to see what I can commit to without like being too terrified of not being able to actually finish it. All right, so I'm pretty confident that we can do probe around Venus. So we'll say that, and that'll get us a bit of money. Shoot, do I just go for broke and get all three of these? So yeah, this is 1,460 days, which is, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 4-ish years. So we'll have at least one more full set of transfer windows before those all expire. So I think that'll be fine. So I'm going to accept all of these so that we have all that ready to go. Yeah, these are all the same amount of time. So let's just grab all that. And that way we have the money that we are, you know, that we need to make this happen. All right, so now let's try to get this down under 100 days if we can. Okay, that hurt my feelings. But I did one rush build on the Scanner 1, which only saved me about 2 days, and then I did 4 rushes on the Pioneer Venus, which cost me about 200,000 funds and got me 35% progress. But this should now, in theory, be down to 89 days, which should be enough to get that done, because the rollout time and the refurbishing of the pad is not going to be something that we have to count against that. So it should just be the straight build time, 89 days, and then we should be able to hit that transfer window unless something horrible happens, which it might, but you know, there's only so much you can do. So yeah, that is how we're going to do it. That is horribly inefficient and probably not the way you want to go about these things, but you know, we got to do what we got to do. So let's move on to the next launch. In the next episode, I mean, unfortunately. Sorry for the bait and switch there, but yeah, we are just about out of time, and instead of trying to cram in another rocket launch at the end of this, we'll just keep these 2 episodes relatively pure and just talk about the design of this very complicated mission that I have set basically some self-imposed deadlines on myself to make this such a time crunch. There's no reason that I needed to hit this particular transfer window instead of the next one, but that is a discussion for another time. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.